was a great idea, by the way, that this particular topic, I can't take any credit for it, Brian. This was your idea. But when I thought about it on the way back home today, I was like, I think Brian would actually be way more credible than I would be to comment on this topic. I think might even have a conflict of interest to actually answer this honestly. Not that I wouldn't, but some part of me might struggle to kind of. I benefit personally by more people believing that an MBA is absolutely valuable, and so I have a conflict between maybe intellectual honesty and my paycheck, which is always a very uncomfortable situation, right? Most people will sell out for paycheck,
Yeah.
um, but also I don't know that I'm going to go out on a limb here and actually say this isn't just me. I think a lot of professors don't really know kind of how strong the value proposition is anymore for you guys, right? Partly because it's not our job to recruit,
Yeah.
that's someone else's job. And, there are certain faculty that will be handpicked to be showcased, and then a bunch of other faculty who are kind of shoved off into a closet somewhere. Like you discover them when you actually kind of show up for your degree.
Yeah.
So to some degree, we're not even part of it. We just kind of take it for granted that there's always going to be a class. And I think in some ways that sadly makes me maybe less qualified than I'd like to think I am to actually answer this question. But I would be super curious what you think. Now that you're some years out, you've got the wisdom of looking back. You're far enough away that you can have more objectivity.
Yeah. Short answer, no. Um,
Oh, it's
but
going to be a short video. Okay, yeah.
no, no, no. I did it for like a pretty unique circumstance, right? Like I had kind of like never thought I knew what I wanted to do with my life, but I thought there was like stuff I should be doing. Like I thought I should go to pharmacy school because my dad's a pharmacist, and I was like, that's what you should do. And then I quickly realized, no, I hate that. So I ended up working for a senator for 5 years. And I was like, okay, this was a lot of fun. Loved the job. Think it's super cool. Learned a lot. And obviously the salary there kind of sucked. Um, and I was just like, all right, I did this for 5 years. I want to kind of like see what else is out there. And I had like no concept of what was out there because like my parents both worked in healthcare. My mom was a nurse, my dad was a pharmacist. And that's kind of like the only like career I saw in like teachers, right? And educators and like track coaches. Um, so like I didn't really know what was out there, so that's why I went to pharmacy school. And then like even while I was there, I was kind of insulated, right? It was like specifically a pharmacy school. And like some folks that studied bachelor's programs that went into like become doctors and stuff. And I like somehow ended up at the Senate. That's a long story short. That's also a short story. But I was just doing that and having a good time, just like enjoying life, like hanging out. And I was like, what kind of jobs could I get after working at the Senate? Right. I was like working on writing bills, meeting with lobbyists, all that kind of stuff. And I kind of like never really knew like the diversity of jobs out there. And I was like applying to a bunch of jobs in like government affairs, like in lobbying and stuff like that. And I wasn't really getting that many bites. There was like some like stuff that I was like kind of interested in. Like I knew I was like kind of interested in tech. I was like applying for like gov relations stuff at like Uber and Lyft and like Lime Bike and all that stuff, but like nothing really bit. And I was just like, shit, I don't know what to do. So I should go get an MBA because it seemed like that would open doors, but I didn't even know what the doors were. Right. Like I still don't even know what like then like I did my MBA. I don't really know what like investment banking is. Like I know what consulting is. I don't know like what's a finance job? I don't like I still don't know when I did my MBA, right? But like I think it was like I had applied because I didn't really see like any other way to get out of this like gov or government affairs like niche that I was felt stuck in. And I wanted to do other stuff. So I was like, the internet said get an MBA. So I was like, let's fucking get this MBA. And I honestly, initially I'd gotten accepted and I was like unsure about it. So I actually deferred for a year. For like you know, but I guess I had like if I hadn't, I mean, there was a lot of good and or not a lot of good, but there were some good things from it for sure. I think like what I had wish I had done was kind of what I did to get my current job. Like I went on Twitter and I just started DMing a bunch of different like companies, just like
Hmm.
cold DMing people and companies and saying, hey, this is like what I want to work in. I was like, I want to work in crypto and I don't know how, but like I'd love to talk to you and stuff like that. I learned that from like the MBA. Like you can do whatever you want. You can just message some random person on the internet and they might respond to you. And that's like a inroad, right? Yeah, I guess I wish I had known like what else was out there. Like what is in the business world? Like what is corporate affairs? What is data analytics? What is like coding? Like all this stuff. Like I don't know, maybe I like personally just like lived under this rock and was just like partying too much and having too much of a good time in upstate New York. And I was like unaware, but like I wish I had like kind of known what kind of jobs existed and I just like hit up any startup and said, hey, I'll do anything. And just started like I wish I had just like worked at a startup for a couple of years, at least before the MBA. Like maybe it would have been worth it later. Maybe it is worth, who knows? Like it's already done. But uh I think it would have been cool to like work at a startup for, just kind of explore and see like all the different roles and like what else is out there. Get exposure to the real world. And I see like why it makes so much sense that people should like work before getting an MBA. Before I was like, well, maybe not, but like it makes so much sense. So like I worked for 5 years and got my MBA, but I wish I had worked more or like at least had more diversity in the work that I did prior. Um, yeah. So that was that
Okay.
yeah.
I feel like there's a few themes in what you're saying, and I do want to play devil's advocate a little bit on the value of the MBA, and
Sure.
then you can shoot me down if it turns
No,
out what I'm
no.
saying is just nonsense. Um, so the way I understand your story, which it's not uncommon at all. Like you were kind of in mid 20s. Is this kind of the point where we're kind of thinking? Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So in your mid 20s, you've got a certain number of years out. Um, you've already reached the conclusion that what you're doing in that moment is not what you want to be doing for the rest of your life, right? Which is super common, right? And then there's a problem of, well, what do I do now? And what you don't have in that moment is a clear sense of what all the options are and what they would look and feel like, right? By definition. Um, and so you feel like it's quite limited. So you kind of hit the MBA button and you kind of pay to go get the degree to presumably get an answer to this question, right? Okay, devil's advocate question number one. Why do you feel like that didn't work when you actually do something that you really enjoy now? That's a job that you got after graduate. Like, I mean, if I was at, Stern's career management office, I would be watching this video and being like, this guy, like, we could sell him as a great success story. I don't know what he's talking about.
All right, so we can go into the funny parts now. So while I was at CERN, I like the most valuable part of it was the opportunity I had to like try other things. I wish I could have tried more things, but like I did Amy Webb's there was a class I took called Predicting the Future of Technology. where you essentially like did a consulting project kind of for a client. And the client I had was like the US Air Force. So that was like a ton of fun. That was like real world work experience that kind of helped me like figure out like what I like. I kind of felt like, oh, I was still like drawn to this whole like public service aspect. Kind of, I did that towards the end of my MBA, so it kind of reignited the, oh, this is like something I should do. Um, I did an internship at City Ventures, which is this like incubator like that city has for employees that are like want to start their own company and have like resource like city resources allocated to them to kind of do that. And I did that for a chunk, like while like during the semester. Uh, and it was like, it was one of those things I did because I thought it would look good and I thought I should do it, right? Like, all right, it's at City, it's in like their, venture-ish arm that they have kind of, or incubator arm, whatever it's called. Uh, and then I also, so like, it was cool. It was an all right experience, right? It was just okay, I guess. Felt like I should leverage the skills I had to like get into my next career. And the skills I had was government affairs or government, which was like not there weren't really like too many post MBA careers related to that. And the healthcare background, like going to pharmacy school. So I was like applying to a lot of large pharma companies, Merck, Pfizer. And I was like, oh, this is what I should do because this was my background. When I should have just been like, nah, do what's fun, do what's cool, do what's interesting. I wish I had done that more. But like what ended up happening was I had got a return offer from Bristol Myers Squibb, signed it, and was like, all right, this is where I'll go after I graduate. Got a nice 130K salary. I don't even remember what the offer was, somewhere around there, 130K base or something. And I was like, this is sick because I was working at the Senate before and my salary was like 40K. Um, but 130K doesn't take you far in New York. But that's besides the point. I accepted the offer and then I was like thinking like during my whole like last or like post summer, I was just like, I have a feeling this is like not the move. Like have a feeling I'm gonna want to like blow my brains out if like I do this. I'm sure there's like people that loved it and that's awesome for them. It just wasn't my thing. So I was like, I need to figure out how to get a job in crypto. I don't really know. Like I messed around trading shit coins, but I just thought the space was cool because it felt like everyone was a bunch of like internet pirates. And I was like, how the fuck do I get a job here? And I'm pretty sure I reached out to the career development people and they were just like, yeah, I don't fucking know. Because it was like, what are they gonna do? Like how many people back then, this was like 2020. This was also during the pandemic, but we can talk about that later. But um, it was like how many connections did they have in like one the startup world and crypto, right? It was just like it like I there was a point I realized during my second year that I was like, if I want a job that I'm gonna really like I'm the only one that's gonna be able to make that happen. So I just like went on Twitter, went on LinkedIn, just started ripping messages to every random person that worked in crypto and eventually came across where I'm at now, Chainalysis, and did like an internship there during my last semester. And I was like absolutely in love with it. And I was like, this is so dope. I remember distinctly during the internship, like it was I was like in the shower and I was like, I can't wait till this shower's over so I can go to work. And I was like, there's no way I can like just go and work at Bristol Myers Squibb after this. So I just like against career development's guidance, I like reneged my Bristol Myers offer and was like, I'm gonna go work at Chainalysis. Took a fat pay cut too, right? Like, because it's a startup, and ended up working at Chainalysis. So
No, so a couple of just, it's funny. I feel like this is there's like a trial happening, and then there's like a legal team on both sides. So I'm trying to play the other side, like
yeah,
the
yeah.
defense, even though that was not my intention, just hearing you talk. But I feel like that if I do this, then it's going to get clearer kind of what the answer is here, right? For especially for anyone listening. Um, okay, so maybe the career management office was not helpful for these particular paths, right? Startup slash crypto. Totally see why that's true. I could also see why they would be steering you towards kind of a traditional employer that they
Yeah.
have a relationship with. Totally get that. So that might suggest then that going there for an MBA, if you're interested in those paths, like wouldn't necessarily help you a lot, except getting your internship at Chainalysis. Did it matter to them that you were an NYU MBA? Oh,
No, I don't think
really?
so. I
Really?
honestly, I guess so. The internship at Bristol was like corporate. It was doing business insights or data analytics or something at like in the corporate affairs team. But like the internship at Chainalysis was it was operations at like the for the training team. And I was basically just like coordinating, hey, these two trainers are going to go teach X three-letter agency on this day. It was just kind of like it was very like a job I could have done right out of undergrad or even before undergrad, finishing undergrad. So it did, honestly, I'm sure the hiring manager saw NYU and was like, "Oh yeah, this is great." But I think like they could tell like so actually, it's interesting because like there was a marketing internship I had applied to at Chainalysis doing marketing operations. And they actually rejected me. And it's funny because I talked to the dude who rejected me for that internship is still at the company. And I was like, I kind of like joke with him that he like rejected me. And he's like, there was no way I was going to let you do that internship because I knew how passionate you were about crypto and passionate you were about like the work Chainalysis did, that like that would not have been something you would have like flourished and grown into like where you are now. So like he rejected me from that, and then like the training team accepted me. So I did like 4 rounds of interview. I guess it helped. I guess the interview prep helped at Stern. I mean, that definitely helped. But it was a very like, no, I don't think I think like they can feel like how into them I was, like the company and the mission. That they were like, all right, this guy's we'll let him. I would have done anything there. I remember like after basically I attended a webinar on like taking down a darknet market that they did in conjunction with it was either the IRS or the FBI. Maybe it was the Department of Justice. And I emailed the DO, like I reached out to someone in the Department of Justice, and I reached out to someone at Chainalysis and I was like, I want to do this. How do I do this? And the DOJ part didn't work. I also yeah, the DOJ part didn't work. Um, but the chain part did. Someone at chain was like, all right, let's talk to this guy a little bit more, and an internship popped up, and that's what happened. So
I see. So the story you're basically telling me is of a guy who showed up for the MBA, um, didn't really get a whole ton of support to go down this road, and then you basically like hustled. But more importantly than that, you were genuinely passionate about crypto, and they saw that. So
yeah,
basically, that got you in more than the,
yeah.
oh, this guy is an MBA from NYU.
I'm sure people I would definitely guess that like that helped when like I got a full-time offer from them. They like initially kind of gave me a salary I wasn't pleased with, and I was like, I just got an MBA from NYU and I have a lot of student loans left. There's no way I can like Like I need more money. It didn't come close to like Bristol, but it was like, all right, I guess I could do this. Just because I really enjoyed it. And yeah, so I think there are like, yeah, I think people see like, I don't even know who looks at resumes anymore, but I guess the people that do, or like go on LinkedIn and they're like, oh yeah, NYU, MBA. I think it's just like a filter, right? All right, this person was committed enough to show up to take a test and not completely suck at it, and probably did some other interesting stuff in their life. So like it's a good filter. Um yeah.
Do you think, looking back though, it was a necessary filter? Because if you say yes, there's still an argument for getting the, even in your case.
I don't I don't think so. There weren't like I don't know. I would guess it to get the job at Chain or the internship at Chain.
Yeah.
No, I don't think there was like it wasn't like an MBA specific internship. Like they would have accepted someone in undergrad. Uh, uh, yeah. So it
Okay.
was like I think I think it helped that I went, but I don't think it was like the oh yeah, we need an NYU MBA to coordinate the scheduling of trainings for this team, like and like do some like data analytics projects. Like it wasn't, yeah, I wouldn't say it was the killer. I think talent teams care too much about stuff like that. They're like, oh, this person worked in finance at this cool finance company or bank, whatever that's what they're called. This person has this MBA from this top tier school and worked at Facebook. Like, I think, I think folks over index for that and don't appreciate enough people that like show up and are like, this industry's sick. I want to work in this and I'll do like anything to work in this industry. And I think that leads to like a lot of like folks getting hired that probably would do better elsewhere. Um yeah. So
Yeah?
I yeah,
Okay.
I'm a firm believer in that, especially at like a company that I think like operates best in like when I had joined, there were 250-ish employees. And like over the course of like 2 years, it grew to like 1,000. And I think as they were growing, it was like, we need to grow. We're gonna IPO one day. We need some MBAs to figure that part out, right? Like get the ship in order. And I think I'm like a firm believer in like finding people that are like passionate, that live and breathe and want to do that work, and hiring them is better methodology than like looking at a resume and being like, oh, this person worked in consulting at McKinsey or BCG, and now they want to work at a startup and be a chief of staff, so we should give them that job. I I think yeah. So that's my take on that. I
And
think there is
just so I understand, this isn't coming from your personal bias so much as just observing how people do after hire. Is that what you
yeah,
mean?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And then like anytime I interview someone, I'm like, why do you want to work here? Why do you like crypto? Why do you like the mission of this company? Like I'm like a personal, like anyone who's like, I don't know. I feel like anyone who I've interviewed and been like, they don't want to live and breathe this. I'm like, no. Like I need to like feel passion talking to them for me to like give them the thumbs up. And I feel like I get like kind of roasted a little bit for like maybe being harsher than I should in like the interview process. I don't know. Um, yeah, I just like, yeah.
I'm going to ask you a dangerous question then, because
Uh-oh.
you've now proposed something like pretty stark, right? That when given the choice between two candidates, right? One with the elite school MBA, right? For as an example, right? It doesn't have to be that specifically. And someone who is just like a crypto acolyte, right? Like just they live and breathe it. If you didn't hire them, they're still going to go off and do crypto anyway. Like it doesn't really
Yeah.
matter. You've got a clear opinion about which one would be the better hire. My question is why? Like why is that the case? Because there's an argument for the other type, which is okay, maybe they're not passionate about it, but they know what a corporate organization looks like and might have some kind of knowledge of how to kind of put processes in place, for example, right? I'm just making this up. Um, they might have some sort of like uh, general management expertise, right? Because,
Yeah.
they kind of have seen teams run before in more established enterprises, for example, right? Again, I'm totally making this stuff up, but there's a theoretical argument you could make that that crowd with these great resumes, great quote unquote resumes, brings something to the table that the other crowd does not. But you're suggesting actually it's not worth it, and I'm wondering why that is.
My opinion is I think I think for the people that work doesn't feel like work, it's just like a completely different experience, right? Like never once working in a chain, even on days I've woken up at like 4 a.m. for work, have I been like, oh fuck, I gotta go to work. Maybe at 4 a.m. Yeah, but like uh I've never like looked at the clock ever. But I'm like a firm believer that if you have like a band of people that are really into the work that they do, they'll figure out the like other stuff. The other stuff is like, especially now with like maybe I'm like overestimating chat GPT, but like if if they were like if Chain ever was like, hey, can you manage like I did the training team for a while, was training, teaching, did product marketing for a while. Both those jobs, if they were like, hey, we need you to manage a team of trainers, we need you to manage a team of product marketers. Yeah, I feel like I could have done that. I feel like I could have like figured it out just by like sheer passion for the company and the work and the mission. Um, but maybe I'm ignorant. And I mean,
It's an interesting question, right? Because there's a much deeper question, really, that I'm asking your opinion about is what is the right way to hire? Now, this is a really specific context, right? So this is a question of what is the right way to hire for Chain. Chain is not necessarily every company or
yeah,
organization. So we should keep that in mind, right? But you're giving me an answer that sounds, yeah, I mean, this makes actually a lot of sense. Particularly, I think if you need people who have, how would I describe this? There's like multiple ideas running around in my head. One is that crypto is something that because it's still emergent, there needs to be, I'm going to sound like an academic for a moment, like a social construction and legitimacy around it that's still growing. Do you know what I mean? So for example, like fiat currency already has a social structure around, like we don't ask ourselves like, I don't know about this, right? We might get to that point soon again, but we haven't, since birth, at least you and I
yeah,
woken up and be like, huh, like, what is this supposed to be? Like this fiat currency, like we just kind of, it's part of the structure. It's established. It's completely legitimized, right? Crypto is not there yet by definition, right? There are absolutely people who look at crypto and they're like, what is it? I don't know what's going on. This looks like it's a bunch of meme coin gamblers. Um, and it will get there. But part of what helps something like this get there, right? Similar to something like a fiat currency, is that you need to sort of have it fit into the broader society in a way that makes sense. We understand why it's there. There's a wonderful narrative Um, so for example, here in Kansas City, there's the Money Museum that you can go to, which is attached, literally it's in the Federal Reserve building.
Oh, that's cool.
And you literally go and you just learn about money,
That's
right?
cool.
Like, right? So what is that about? That's about basically you going and just learning the nuances and the mechanics of how the system works, right? Which fiat currency is absolutely like center stage there, right? In terms of how that is. Um, Crypto's not there yet, right? Like we
No.
don't go to a crypto museum and like understand how crypto works in the broader, like it's partly because that's still emergent, right? Like we
Yeah.
don't know yet.
But do you think that these organizations, I feel like a lot of these organizations that have been around for a while that have a ton of employees have too many people that work there that leads to like this organization becoming sclerotic and like
Yes.
things taking too long and like people are just like it feels like again like I feel kind of bad saying this and maybe I shouldn't be saying this because like I haven't worked at these organizations, right? It feels like people are just doing a job as opposed to like on this mission to like really and I don't want to overgeneralize. I'm sure there are people that work at financial institutions that are like, I love this. And that there definitely are. But
Yeah.
I think like when you overhire and you're just like, all right, how do I find this smart person? You're like, all right, I'm gonna pick them out of this school, see this resume. They did this three internships here. Cool. They seem like the right person. I think organizations do a bad job of like identifying like the right person to hire. Um,
Yeah.
and do you know there's this author, John Strelicky? Have you ever heard of this guy?
Doesn't ring a bell.
He, you would love this book. Like you would love it, actually.
Okay.
It is there. I'm trying to remember that there's two books that I have by him. Someone gifted them to me. One of them is called Cafe at the Edge of the World. And honestly, I'm gonna like look up. He has like this key principle to hiring. I'm gonna chat GPT it real quick. So he has this concept in the book Cafe on the Edge of the World that introduces the concept of one's like it's called PFE, purpose for existing. And he like applies it to his hiring practices in his organizations. And what does this say? I'm trying to remember. I read this book a while ago. Ah, yes. It talks about how organizations should seek candidates whose personal purposes align with the company's mission and values. Right? By doing so, employees are more likely to find fulfillment in their roles, leading to increased motivation and productivity. That's the TLDR. And like having this like personal alignment, not the like, I mean, the money alignment matters, but like this like it being part of your identity and like someone taking pride in their job and thinking their job is cool as hell, like regardless of what it is, I think matters so much.
So there's another side though that's a cynical side, right? Who would say that, and tell me what you think, right? It's not that I believe this, it's like a voice, right, that I'm hearing. So when you talked about how much like someone needs to be passionate, and that's part of your hiring criteria chain. And one of the things that I was saying that, made that make sense was because you're part of an enterprise where I'm going to use the word evangelism, but I really mean more that, because it's emergent, it's still being defined, and passionate people are going to be much better at helping to define the structure and let everybody know what it is, what the rightful place in society for crypto, than people who are working 9 to 5s who don't actually care that much, right? Like
Yeah.
that's not the right group of people to kind of implement change, right? And so, but most organizations, right, many, I'll use the word many organizations don't necessarily require that level of innovation. Now, they might benefit from that innovation. And so there's still an argument for having people like this. But if you and I were to just kind of walk out into the world and just look in the economy at all the many different businesses, big and small, what we would see is that a lot of them kind of do okay without having a bunch of people who feel like that they have a strong sense of purpose to it, right? I mean, think of the extreme example of like factory floors, for
Mhm.
example, and how those work. Maybe some percentage of the people on the floor do feel passionate, but it doesn't tend to lend itself well to passion, right? This very
Yeah.
repetitive kind of set of tasks that people might do. And so I think your average factory floor manager probably isn't super focused on hiring people who are very aligned by purpose. So what I feel like I'm hearing a little bit about in your history is that you have pretty strong emotional reactions to the work you do, right?
Yeah.
Either positive or negative. Actually, interestingly enough, it really sounds like it's extremely polarized to like one end or the other. You didn't seem to have too many like I really felt okay about it, right? It was
Yeah.
either I loved it or actually I really didn't like it at
That
all.
that's a really good point. And like thinking about it now, you're absolutely right. It's either I fucking hated it or I loved it or really, really enjoyed it. There's no, yeah, I did it and it was like, okay, so I kept doing it. Like I
That's
don't know.
interesting. I mean, I'll propose a hypothesis. I don't know if it's true. So feel free to kind of tell me you disagree with this. I think this is a personality predisposition, right?
Yeah.
I don't think it's the jobs. Do you know what I mean? Like it wasn't that statistically you just happened to be given extreme jobs of one way or the other. I think you were just given jobs, but your reactions went in one direction or the other on the spectrum of emotional reaction. And having that as a trait, I think makes you more likely to go into something that you love because you can't tolerate the other side very easily.
Yeah, that I can get on board with what you're saying. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Nothing wrong with that. It's just it's a predisposition that was going to lead you down a certain road, right? Because then the very important related question is, okay, so what predicts your emotional reaction of loving something, right? And then that'll tell you something, right, about what might give you that. Now, I got to be honest, I can't draw a common thread between pizzeria, ice cream shop, crypto, and government. I just don't know what that is. But
The the immediate common thread that comes to the top of my head was the people I worked with.
okay, I wondered if that was it actually.
Yeah, the pizzeria. There was like two of my close friends growing up. They also worked there, but they weren't always there when I was there, right? When I worked for the New York State Senate, I loved my boss. The senator I worked for was super cool. Just like he was just a like I just as a human being, he was a very good person, like a very good human being, and he was fun. I think like he was definitely more unique than a lot of the other senators and like politicians out there. I think if there were folks at in government who like when they walk into their office, they expect like someone to take their coat and hat and all that nonsense. And this guy was like, we'd go get beers together. He'd have to beg us to do work sometimes. And he was just, and I loved everyone in the office. Like I enjoyed talking to. Like I had, and then where else? Chain. Yeah. There's a lot. I love the people I work with. When I joined, I was like in so much love with some of my colleagues. I was like, these people are so smart, and like I like hanging out with the number of them, and even now, like one of them is like my best friend. We go on like trips together and hang out all the time, work out together. So, it in the ice cream shop, two very fun co-owners, uh, just like knew how to have a good time. And like, so maybe that's the thread. The people like maybe it's part of the thread.
I, yeah, I mean, so it's first glance, this might sound odd, but actually, I can tell you from what I've seen, right, having seen lots of people go through this, um, the people are actually the by far the biggest common kind of explanation of why someone likes being where they are.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, if we're talking about why did you like something, the irony is that a lot of people will choose something like pay and prestige and then hate where they are. But
Yeah.
they'll kind of stay because they have the type of personality where pay and prestige, it's hard to walk away from that because it's sort of admitting failure on a certain level, despite the fact that it's like the most miserable place on earth for them. Or not just for them, maybe for everybody who's there. So that there's that track, but many people, if they end up staying in a place for a very long time and don't like have horrible health stress related issues, it's actually because they like the people there, right? And they fit in, and I think there was a very good, which is an interesting way to think about this, right? So when we talk about people feeling passionate and all this stuff, which is what you talked about earlier in terms of who's a successful hire at Chain. Actually, a lot of this is about creating a group of people where you kind of have a community that you want to be a part of, right? Which is not how we usually frame hiring or looking for a job.
I think it's a community of like grinders that are on like the same mission. And like that goes back to that like Streckley book. I'm probably butchering this guy's name, but like because when you're doing something you like, you're like having fun, right?
Yeah.
And when you're having fun with other people who are also having fun, you're having a good time, right? Like there are times where it doesn't even feel like work. And I don't know. I think there's just like something to it. I feel like we went off
Yeah. This is
the
not about the
NBA
MBA
rails
at all.
quite a bit now, but
But
to like loop it back, I mean, what do you think? Like when it comes to the NBA, there are like some positives I'm happy to like list off,
the
but
the
you go ahead.
traditional answer, which I want to believe is still true, is that the most useful high value added case for having an MBA is when you're on a particular career path when it's really hard to do a big career change. Like if you, for example, are working in finance and actually you've discovered your life's passion is marketing,
Yeah,
not easy to make a switch. But somehow in our society, going to an MBA gives you that get out of jail free card that you can play once to make that switch without anybody questioning why, right? Like whether you're still a good candidate or not. Um, and so it plays that particular usefulness. I think if you were going to do something like 3 years of banking and then just had every intention of just going back to banking, probably less useful unless you just wanted a vacation, right? I know that when I was in banking, that was certainly how a lot of people thought of their MBA was like, I'm just going to take a couple years off and call it vacation, but it's an MBA, right? Um, but I would say that is a relatively lower value, right? So career change where you feel like you're in a stuck track, I think has the biggest kind of payoffs. There's certain jobs I think too that going to a top tier MBA at least would be helpful for. Like if you want to be an associate at a big investment bank or you want to be at a place like BCG or McKinsey, right? I mean, these are natural feeders for those places.
yeah,
If you really want to do those careers, one could argue whether, someone who wants that track really has any idea what those tracks really are until they get there, and whether
yeah.
that really means that it's a well thought out kind of plan or not. but if you're pretty sure that really is what you want, I could see that too. Where traditional MBA programs generally, I think, will really not do as great a job is, for example, in your path to crypto, like emerging new industry. I mean, they're just not even thinking that. They don't even necessarily have strong incentives to care about that as much because from the school side, it's like a factory model, right? Like there's always a new class.
Yeah.
And so the incentive is to have established relationships with big name employers so you can fill the class and get your average starting salary to a certain number that makes you happy,
Yeah.
right? And because it's a factory, there's nothing about this factory that necessarily has strong incentives to cultivate like, well, we need to have 10 graduates go to crypto every year, for example, right? I think that will change. It may already be changing, and there probably is more of that than there used to be, but certainly not on the cutting edge, right? More like a lagging thing where there's a reaction to kind of changing employment, right? Um, I'm old enough to remember that, for a lot of MBA programs, like the creme de la creme jobs were all like MBB consulting or bulge bracket investment bank. But then big tech came along, right?
Yeah.
And paid better
Yeah.
and seemed to treat their people better.
Yep.
So that ended up being the go-to, right? A bunch of people would kind
Everyone
of
wanted to be a product manager when I remember.
everybody wanted to go to a place like Google or Meta or whatever it was. And those were the preferred jobs, right? And maybe
Yeah.
in MBA, by and large, they still are. I'm not sure. But so there is kind of this what's best for the herd question, but this by definition isn't going to care a whole lot about things that are really more fringe or emergent, like crypto. And startups, it's really hard to know what to do with startups,
Yeah.
right? Because a lot of them won't make it.
Mhm.
Um, like there are a lot of people I know who are entrepreneurship professors, but the question that I'm always too scared to ask them is like, how many of your students ended up being successful entrepreneurs, right?
Yeah.
As a result of having gone through the program? Because I feel like virtually all the successful startups I see didn't come from entrepreneurship graduates. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Sure.
yeah, exactly. Like something just didn't. That's always like one of those elephants in the room I don't talk about, right? But yeah, that's kind of a big question actually, right? That rings in my head a lot. So, back to the MBA, I think it really depends on who you are. It's really clear in your case, given the path that you were going to go down, that it wasn't necessarily going to be a great fit at the outset, but it's also not clear you would have known that beforehand, which
Yeah.
I think is, we can call that life, we can also call that unfortunate, right? That wouldn't it be nice if there was a better mechanism to kind of give you an idea about what you could do? But of
Yeah.
course, if you go to the website for an MBA program, they're going to make you want to come. That's the
Yeah.
intention, right? They're not going to be like, here's a survey that you can take about whether the MBA is right for you, where like 50% of the answer will be like, no, actually don't
Yeah.
come, right?
Damn, sounds like a pretty useful tool.
Right, one which no school will actually propose, right? Because we all benefit by selling the idea that it's right for as many people as possible, right? And then
Yeah.
kind of getting you guys to graduate. I mean, Bryan, you may or may not know this. Globally, demand for MBA degrees is declining, but certainly in North America, this is true.
Yeah.
And so, universities don't like to think of themselves as a business, but at some point we are, right? If the revenue keeps going down, like
Yeah.
what do? You have basically a fixed cost structure for the most part. So
I mean, there's like memes about hiring MBAs now, like on Instagram and like all that stuff, just like kind of trolling the concept of it. So like,
yeah, those memes are really not helping our industry. But I totally understand why they exist. Like, I mean, Bryan, even when I was going, like, I don't have an MBA precisely because I couldn't figure out why I would go get one.
hmm,
Right. So, and there were other people who, even at that time, were kind of starting to question. And now I think that thinking has really spread. Now it's okay, you need to prove to me, or I need to prove to myself why I need to go back for an MBA, right? And there's still very positive use cases for going back for the degree, but I think before, every school could bank on a certain number of people showing up like the herd, being, I'm here because this is what people do, right? And
Yeah.
there's still that crowd, but that crowd is way smaller than before. And so, and let's be honest, this podcast episode, if and when it gets posted, is not helping the cause. But
Well,
uh,
I guess another like important question, hopefully it gets posted soon. Like that's temporally relevant is like, what do you think the implications are? You know, I guess two questions. One, with like the economic uncertainty that feels like it's looming. I think like Polymarket said recession odds 70% today. Uh with the tariffs and all that. Like what do you think like is right now the time to do it? Like
yeah,
weather the
so
storm in MBA? Like
it's a
what's
really good question. So the right time, if we were just okay, let's put aside purpose, passion, all that stuff, because that's a bigger question. It's way more complicated. If you just wanted to time your graduation date, what you definitely don't want is to graduate right into a recession. That's terrible. So one of the most interesting academic studies I remember seeing in economics was a guy who was looking at what happened to university graduates who graduated into a recession versus into like a period of economic expansion, and just looked at how their wages were affected
a
over time.
lifetime earning potential is dramatically different, right?
It's yeah, like it takes forever for them to recover from graduating. And of course that has nothing to do with how smart you are, how hard you, literally nothing except the year that you happen to show up,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Which you tend to have very little control over, or we don't think to consciously control that anyway. So, and I think that's even more true with an MBA degree. So you would ideally want to time this when hiring picks back up. Right. So don't use the stock market because that's a leading indicator, right? You ideally would have already wanted it to bottom and already be up a reasonable amount, because then you'll see that hiring starts to pick up. Um, what's I think really kind of, I won't use the word problematic because I don't know that it's problematic, but what would worry me now if I was thinking about going for an MBA, if we do get a recession, I don't know if it's going to be shallow or not, but it would be nice to think it is, right? And your average recession, it doesn't usually last 2 full years, right? Or something like that. But the MBA degree is 2 full years. So let's say that you could go in now, right? That's a relevant question. You'd probably time it kind of okay, short of anything worse than what you've already seen happening.
Yeah.
Um, I think the concern, though, is that the normal business cycle bounce back, is it going to happen when AI is evolving as quickly as it is?
That
So
was the next question. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
AI.
here's what's scaring me. So normally the answer is yes, right? Normally I wouldn't even think a new technology like AI would be an issue, but my friends who work in big tech, like out in Silicon Valley, the stories I'm hearing are that AI is already starting to replace, like a lot of them are actually fearful about their jobs.
Yeah. It's so
Um,
fair.
and that's where it would start if this was going to happen, right? That would be the first place I would expect to see it. And then you would start to see it spreading throughout the economy as adoption kind of spreads. And so what I'm a little worried about, right? And again, no evidence, right? We just got to see what happens, is that we will see layoffs and then we will not see the recovery that we would have expected, because AI will have, like, companies will have discovered, wait, we actually don't need this many
Mhm.
people, right? And
Yeah.
we chatted before about AI and jobs, right? Before, but specifically on the MBA question, I'm a little worried that that normal bounce back won't bounce back quite to the
Intent.
same degree. And I don't, one way that B schools could combat this is by educating differently so that they still produce candidates that would be ready for the AI world. The problems AI is moving so much faster than schools or school administrators or
Yeah.
committees or whoever you want to call it. I haven't even heard of anybody having really seriously that conversation yet, right? Like, what do we change in our curriculum so that we get ready for what's coming? And that conversation won't happen until you have a few waves of students just basically fall off a cliff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's I think the one thing like NYU's like kind of potentially crushing. I'm not like paying close attention to it, but they have like a chief AI architect, right? This was the dean, I think, when I was in school, Connor Grennan, and he's like the dude like lives and breathes AI stuff. So I think like they've done a good job. I don't know like how his role extends to like throughout the MBA education. Um, but it seems like some schools are bending the knee to robots, or at least, ready to.
To AI? Okay, so maybe NYU then ends up being on this list. I would still be skeptical about it's great that they're thinking about it. I think part of the problem is even if you've got committees talking about this already, I don't think we all know what the next job is that AI will create high demand for that's going to pay super well.
Yep.
Um, because it's evolving so fast, right? That, for example, we know that prompting is going to be a super important skill, but it's basically a bunch of people like we're all just kind of hacking it as we go. Like
Yeah.
there's no course on
Yeah.
how to do better prompting. We will definitely have that course at some point once we figure out how to put it all in a structure for education, but I don't know that at the university level we've seen a lot of game changing kind of things because that would presume that you already knew what the job was at the end that companies would hire for, which is really what it comes down to, right?
Yeah.
And because that hasn't been solved yet, it's hard to solve the, well, what do we do in terms of changing our product, right? Like the MBA, which means that the MBA doesn't change until that gets solved. And there might be a transition period that, again, going back to your question, makes it challenging for MBA students, right? Again, not all MBA students, right? There's places that need incoming classes every year because they run on a high turnover model, right? If I think about the big four accounting firms or the consulting firms or the banks, right? Like they all run on this model. So the demand will still be there. But yeah, I do wonder what the impact of AI will be on hitting that stuff. So a naive view would be that if we're just thinking business cycle risk, the MBA could be okay. But if there's this bigger technology risk going on and that manifests, then I think all bets are off, which we just don't know about. And Bryan, that goes well beyond the MBA, as you can imagine, right? If that
Yeah.
actually ends up happening, we've already seen in the middle of the United States a lot of blue collar manufacturing jobs disappear, right? And some of it was going off to places like China, but a lot of it also went off to automation, and that's not coming back ever, right?
Yeah.
Even the reshoring that might be taking place now that Trump is trying to do, if it makes more sense to put in a robot, they're going to do that instead of hire. Like we may not see the same type of job growth that one might have thought otherwise, right? So, but that was all about kind of physical manufacturing. So now we're talking about higher paying, to often higher paying white collar jobs, often management jobs of some kind. If AI starts eating away at that, it's not super obvious what happens there, right? Because if
Yeah. What do
we
those
kind of
people
know
do?
what happened to a lot of the blue collar factory jobs, like it would have been nice to think that they all landed on 2 feet and everything worked out, but it obviously didn't for a lot of them. And I'm a little worried that we might see something like this happening with white collar, particularly middle-aged white collar workers, right across
Yeah.
the board. Yeah, right. Because every business cycle, like layoffs will come, and then they'll try to find something again. But that might be a tough gig, and that's the story I'm starting to hear out in Silicon Valley, a big tech world.
Oh yeah. Huh.
Yeah, but again, super small sample. Maybe it's not generalizable, but it worries me that I'm hearing the story at all. Right.
Yeah, no, I don't have too many connects out there that are in that position, so I can't comment on that.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, man, I feel like this was not the intention, but I feel like we really beat up on the MBA, right? We started by asking you kind of what you think, was it worth it and why not? How much did it help you? The answer was kind of, well, not that much, right? And then you kick the question back to me, kind of bigger picture. There are some use cases, but if we think about trends or possible cycles, like it looks like it's more risky than it used to be
Yeah,
to do something. And it's a significant investment that used to have, I think, relatively little risk,
yeah,
right? Which is why schools could justify the high price tag. And those price tags, I don't think have come down at all. Is that right, Bryan? They probably have, if anything,
no,
raised those.
they definitely have not come down.
Right, exactly. Well, yeah, because the fixed cost infrastructure keeps growing that supports it. So lowering the price ends up being a really hard thing to do, right, for schools. And so given that, this is the challenge, I think, long-term challenge that every university administrator sees for sure, right? But the way that universities are structured, there's not a whole lot you can do to reorganize places until something breaks, right? And we're not quite at breaking yet,
Yeah,
right? Like we
I think
still,
I think we're teetering there slowly.
yeah, yeah, but it's like this very slow steamroller that you can see coming towards you, but it's so slow that you just keep waiting another year
Yeah,
and seeing what else you can do and getting by until that comes. But I do think that yeah, that's the image that I've been seeing for a long while now is that something is coming, and it will make a big difference. But in any given year, if every school can get by, then that's kind of what they'll do, right? As
yeah,
opposed to gearing up for the big change. But that change is definitely coming. Um, yeah, yeah, which is why I think the conclusion of today's episode is definitely that you'd be better off working at a crypto firm maybe than at a university because the future
startup,
is
any startup.
or at a startup, sure.
Yeah, I think. Well, I guess like the last kind of quite interesting question to think about is like, all right, so like let's say in this world an MBA isn't worth it, then like what's the alternative if you're like trying to pivot out of a career? Like what how do you I mean, my take is you grind in the DMs and go to a major city and just like make friends and figure out how to finesse a job at a startup is my take. And just like hop from startup to startup till if you think that's if you haven't done that world yet, I think it's a world worth like exploring before like committing to something like an MBA.
Yeah, I hear you. I think here's what worries me about that. The way that the world is structured now, by and large, is it's structured in a way as to basically provide certainty for the vast majority of people, meaning that there's a system that there's kind of a contract embedded underneath it, meaning, let me explain the terms of the contract. If you're a kid, you're basically told, all right, if you get real good grades in school, you're going to get into these better schools, like these
Yeah,
universities. And the reason you're going to want to do that is that when you graduate from these better universities, right, that's your incentive, you're going to get these better jobs. And I can tell you that with really high probability, like so high that you're going to be convinced that that's true, right? And the evidence will be clear.
yeah,
So now society offers that as a contract to like all young people, right? And the society.
yeah,
And as long as that's true, it kind of works. So maybe people don't necessarily find the job that they love or whatever it is, but at least it reduces things like homelessness or whatever it is. And
yeah,
people kind of have a sense of like, okay, I kind of know what I'm supposed to be doing in the world given the pieces that I see, right? Or I can get that. Okay, so let's remove that last piece then, right? Okay, you might go to this great school. Sorry, we don't really know what's going to happen, right?
Yeah,
Like,
that's not,
like some of you are going to be fine, but not as many of you as before. And we just have this new technology that's just going to replace a whole ton of you. And I have no idea, honestly, what the rest of you are supposed to be doing. So let's say that that's the message, right? That message will filter back down through the rest of the system. And so then you have a world where people just don't have certainty or even like high probability bets the way that they would have. So that's a much harder world to know what to do with, right? This reminds me of worlds like, I'm an aspiring musician, right? If I'm a teenager, I'm thinking about that, right? Or I want to be an actor or actress. I'm going to move to LA and, share an apartment with 5 other people and just grind until I get there.
yeah,
There's nothing wrong with this, but we know that the odds of making a good living down those roads are not great, right? Like a bunch of people will be waiters and waitresses or bartenders and just spending 5 to 10 years of their life trying to make it. A small percentage will make it. They will
yeah.
get big payoffs. But for the vast majority of people, they will not really be able to turn that into something that's going to work out for them. Now, that doesn't mean that AI is going to create this massive disruption where a whole bunch of people are going to be in exactly the same situation. I don't know that that's the case because in that world, that's about a lot of creative kind of products, right? That get created. And we've chatted about creativity before, I know, Brian, but I'm a little worried about transitioning from a world where I can be an accountant, I can be, corporate middle manager, white collar, whatever it is,
Yeah.
and then I know what that looks like, it feels like, and it'll give me a steady career for the rest of my life, even if I don't love it, right? At least I can, have a house, kids, family, all that stuff, and a car. If you take that away, then you go from this kind of stability into something like entrepreneurship where the failure rates are actually pretty high. I
Yeah.
know you're very pro startup, but startups are not for everyone. And the average payoffs they're really like, okay, if you hit it, like you're going to do great. If you bomb 4 times in a row, you're really struggling by, whatever age let's call it 40, right? If it's 4 times.
Yeah.
So is that the world that we're moving towards? Because it's one with a lot less security and certainty for a
Yeah.
very large number of people. And I think that,
Not a good thing. Yeah.
yeah, I'm not sure I would call that societally good, but I also might be too negative. It might be that everyone finally figures out how to adapt and become their own successful entrepreneur, but I would
I mean,
actually be surprised if it worked that way.
I still do believe like there is considerable value in like going to university, like higher education. Like you have the opportunity to kind of grow up in this like there's this stage before like becoming an adult that some people have or like are able to afford, right? And that's where you go learn how much you can drink. That's where you go learn like, how to show up at a place on time if you haven't done that before. I think there's all this like life learning that kind of happens in college that I that maybe you wouldn't have like exposure to in the same way, right? Like I'm sure, yeah, you learn life maybe there. I'm sure you learn life lessons by going to a job right out of school, but I do think like there are other lessons that you learn in a university that during those couple of years that maybe can't be replicated somewhere else yet.
Brian, you don't realize this, but you're actually breaking my heart. Let me explain why. So, okay, MBA aside, we're talking about college now, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay. And you were like, all right, maybe you learned something like showing up for time, like on time for meetings, maybe how to drink, something like this. None of this is taught in coursework, right? So
yeah. Oh
what
yeah.
what I what I was thinking you might say was, I'm so glad I went to college because, the critical thinking training was super important, right?
Yeah.
Or I took this class on XYZ and that really opened my mind to something, but the absence of hearing this from you made me realize that we might be adding even less value, at least in your case, than I had imagined. It's one
Well,
thing to sort of like go to
I
the
was a,
MBA.
I think I was a less than ideal student in undergrad and during the MBA. So
Okay.
I'm, yeah, no, I think that's a me thing. I think I'll even say, like, I have a bunch of friends or a handful of friends that have done MBAs, and they were like, yeah, it was a great decision. I loved it.
Okay. Um, Good stuff. Okay, so just to summarize for the listeners, assuming we don't edit this entire thing out, um, is the MBA worth? Well, for Bryan, for you, it doesn't sound like that it was super high value add. I'd still like to hang on to the vague possibility that your higher ed chain might have had something to do with your MBA, but that's a weak argument. I'm not sure that's actually true. Maybe it helped in your salary negotiation. Maybe that's not even true, but I'd like to think that it might have. And it does seem like that. What is it? Interview practice, right? That seemed to make a difference, right? Just to
Yeah.
kind of give credit where credit is due, right? MBA business schools are that's a strength, right? They kind of throw you in the fire enough times that you kind of learn how to play the game. So there is that kind of thing. And I guess a little bit of credit for the hustle. Did that come from MBA or was that just all you and crypto passion?
No, I feel like I've kind of been a hustler when it comes to stuff.
Okay.
Uh,
Okay.
I had this like, yeah, yeah. I had this track coach who was always like, you get back exactly what you put in. And that always like kind of stuck with me. So,
I
uh,
see. So now credit goes to your track coach and not the NYU MBA program. So I think we've just hit the boundary of where the value was added for you. And and so for people listening, I guess at a minimum, anyone who's listening to you and can really resonate with you and your story probably might take this as a signal of, huh, like this might be what I'll get out of it if I go.
if you get a full ride, go and have a great time. But, when there's costs associated, I mean, there's always the opportunity cost, but, you
That
know,
is a pretty strong statement, right? Full ride means it's free,
yeah.
right? And so let me ask it this way. I feel like there's another question here just to make this crystal clear, right? I think we've answered it in a long-winded way. What do you think the MBA is really bad at that people use it for?
What is it bad at that people use it for?
So in other words, there's a person who's like, all right, I'm going to go into this MBA program and I'm wanting XYZ, and then it just doesn't work.
I think it's bad at a lot of people say, and even before I went, a lot of people had said, like, or not a lot of people, the internet said, like, before you do an MBA, you should know what you want as the outcome.
Hmm.
And I think that makes a lot of sense. Like, if you know you need one, or one helps you get your outcome that you have in mind, then yeah, it makes sense. And going, I don't know what I want to do, but I'm going to figure it out during the MBA. That's where it gets a lot murkier. Like, it's not the place to figure it out, because right in the first semester you're like aggro recruiting, and it's like, what the hell am I doing here? Like, um yeah, I don't think the MBA is advertised as that, like, hey, pull up and you'll figure it out, right? I do think there are some people that think that, like, I'm just going to go and I'm going to figure it out, and that's what I kind of did, and I would probably caution against doing something like that. I think that's where it's bad. It's bad for like figuring it out, which is a shame, because, like, I don't know, I feel like college is all about figuring it out, right? So,
But not the MBA. So you're actually not the first person to tell me that, right? That they weren't sure exactly what they wanted, and then they showed up and then they started having to recruit immediately,
yeah,
essentially, which is
daunting.
like the worst thing you could do,
Yeah.
right? And that sort of blindsided them, right? So I think that is a clear answer for if that's you, definitely think twice about going for an MBA and try to figure out more clearly what you really want, and don't think that you're going to figure it out when you get there, because it's not
Yeah.
even designed for that.
You just don't have enough time to figure it out when you get there.
Right. You're on the clock as soon as you get there. Right.
Yeah.
So that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. Okay. So at least we have that as a very clear kind of red flag potentially for, or a warning sign for someone who might be thinking about it.